time for PerfBytes. What the is PerfBytes? The fourth square meal of the day. Don't bookmark PerfBytes. Waffles, microwave ready. Blobbity blah, blobbity blah. Add nutritional value to your brain. It's time for PerfBytes with your hosts Mark Tomlinson and James Pulley. PerfBytes. Whatever.
Hey, PerfBytean listeners, it is time for another episode of PerfBytes. The PerfBytes, James, we love the PerfBytes. That's my Italian PerfBytes introduction. It's like a big pizza pie. Pizza. Speaking of pizza, we're going to talk about storage performance, which I don't think there's probably some information you could store in a big pizza pie, but it's not. I don't think it actually comes out the same way. So thanks again for joining us, myself, Mark Tomlinson, and your illustrious host, my colleague and friend, Mr. James Pulley. James, how are you?
Yeah.
What are you, from Sicily now, living in New Jersey? Is that how it works?
Yeah, what's it to you?
Well, what's it to you? You and your storage thing over there, big guy?
Yeah,
Exactly.
storage, yeah.
Yes, you made it back from your road trip. You had a nationwide road trip, and you saw lots of PerfBytes listeners out there, actually, didn't you?
I did. I ran across a number of people who listened to PerfBytes. I got some really interesting feedback. One of the bits of feedback that I received was, hey, you guys never drink beer on the show. You're always drinking whiskey or wine or something. So this evening, I've switched gears, and I have from Salt Lake City, Utah, from the Crooked Line Brewery, a bottle of Detour Double India Pale Ale.
Detour Double India Pale Ale. That sounds pretty good. And did you actually get this when you were on the road, or did you buy it locally there in North Carolina?
I got it locally when I was in North Carolina, because evidently you're not allowed to purchase any alcohol in the state of Utah.
Really?
That's what I've been told.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I have to say I'm not imbibing any alcohol this evening, but were I to do so, I'm a big fan of the Rogue beers, as you know, and we did this gig out in Oregon around Portland, so we went to the Rogue Brewery, the headquarters there, multiple times.
Yes.
And it was pretty awesome. And you picked up, there's a Rogue whiskey you picked up, basically moonshine, isn't it?
Well, the Rogue whiskey is a little bit better than moonshine, but there was one place where you and I and Carlos went for dinner that I was worried about you, Mark, because I think it was moonshine that you drank.
Oh, it goes right to your head. This stuff is really strong.
Or close to it. I think that was the McMenamin's Distillery.
Yes. Somewhere out in the woods.
Yeah, out towards Hillsboro. It was a something Roadhouse. It was a great dinner, but boy, we had to sit there a long time.
So welcome everyone, and James, I'm glad you're back home safe off the road. And before we jump into the topic, we should cover some of our industry news items. What do you have for us?
Yeah, some interesting news this week, and I guess we'll start on the hacking front. So you consider this, maybe byline hacking, and more hacking, and not of the, coughing variety in this case. We're looking at Chinese cyber spies going against tons of small businesses in America. And you may have heard about the Syrian Electronic Army going after organizations such as the New York Times.
Yeah.
And even for a while assuming ownership of like Twitter.com.
Oh, yeah.
So this is leading to websites going down and users having really bad experiences. Now, we've hit some of this in News of the Damned in previous episodes. But I think it's worthwhile to separate it out from News of the Damned, because News of the Damned is really about people who plan poorly, implement poorly, don't test, basically engage in all sorts of bad practices, and they're going to pay a price for it.
Because they've been possessed.
Exactly.
And because there's no other rational reason for people to be so stupid about performance, right? You have something supernatural has to be intervening on your IT skills.
There are a lot of stories in the news. Especially if you're in the British fashion industry, you should have pretty good websites at this point.
Yes.
But here in this case, you have actual malfeasance ongoing on the part of either a country or a rogue organization that is attempting to take out a website. So I think we need to separate these out at this point. And I think what we need to do in the future is have our official security advisor at PerfBytes on. His name is Ron Foster, to discuss how performance and security intersect.
Ron would be good to have. There's also, I bring up Raf Los from HP, who's actually is a great security guy, the White Rabbit. So it'd be great. We'd have Ron and Raf on the.
Yeah, both those guys are at HP, so they can sit and they can look at each other across the internet and say, well, can we say that or not?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, as they're talking to us. Next up, Mark, you're probably familiar with the Samsung and Apple stuff that's going on.
Yes, and the internet myth that Samsung paid their fee or fine or something to Apple in pennies, and all these dump trucks of pennies showed up. It's total. I've seen so many people fall for that. It never actually happened.
But you got to admit, it's a good story.
It's a great story.
Yeah. So Samsung has beat Apple to the punch. Apple has some announcements scheduled, and so Samsung scheduled some in advance. And they're talking about Galaxy Gear. So items that kind of extend the Galaxy line of phones to do other functionalities. And the first one they announced is the Galaxy Gear Watch. It's not a full-blown Android device. It's more or less a Bluetooth extension to your core Android device, ideally a Samsung Galaxy phone in their case, of course.
Yeah.
And think of it as like the old-fashioned Dick Tracy watch. We can make phone calls to it. We can look at our itinerary. I didn't see anything that says we can do video calls with it, but that is the Dick Tracy watch. It'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
So these are extensions to the core Galaxy product line that enhance functionality. And of course, it beat Apple to the punch for their announcements. We're not quite sure what's coming from them, but it should be interesting. I have two things to posit on this. One, I wonder if Apple is readying their lawyers, saying, hey, Steve Jobs thought of this in his sleep 15 years ago, and so we're going to sue you. And Apple is reportedly working on a 6-inch iPhone. So, when they see Samsung in the gym next time, they can go, nah, mine is bigger than yours.
Oh, yeah. That's a boys club kind of thing, right? That's unfortunate that it affects, the technology world where it's sort of gender neutral. My smartphone's bigger than your smartphone. That just doesn't really have the same zest of the actual.
Eventually, one of them is going to have a fax, and it's going to be really embarrassing.
Speaking of smartphones,
Microsoft has bought Nokia.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, and there's some suspicion that maybe the head of Nokia, who used to be a Microsoft employee, is he now being positioned as head of both companies?
Yep.
I don't think anyone knows the answer to that at this point. But the two companies have been working really closely together on Windows Phone technology. I can't think of anyone else who's doing a Windows Phone at this point other than Nokia. There might be one or two others out there. But
isn't it HTC? HTC is a Windows Phone.
Yeah, there's so few of them in the market. Every time I look at logs for websites, I see very few Windows Phones.
Yep.
We're both ex-Microsoft employees. Every time I look at what they do these days, I just get a sense of disappointment. And that kind of leads to my next story. Windows XP. End of life is 7 months away from today. Now, Mark, I don't know about you, but I still go into a lot of corporate environments. XP is the desktop standard.
It's amazing, XP SP2, how strong that was. One of the barriers to entry for Vista was that XP had become certified by so many institutions, governments, quasi-governmental organizations, had gone through all of these lengths to say that app, that version, that library, that driver on that machine running Windows XP, and the cost of that is way more than just, I'm going to upgrade my XP to Vista, have a nice day. It's the last breath of electrons for that operating system.
In this case, Windows XP has been really a victim of its own success. It was a really solid operating system, and Microsoft always had a habit, at least when I was there, of designing their operating systems to run on the next generation of Intel hardware that was available 18 months out.
Right.
So run really great there. Well, you look at a 10-year lifespan for XP, it's gone through several hops of generations of hardware.
Oh, yeah.
And it runs really well.
Yeah, it does. But it's
Yeah,
time. It's time, James. It's all done.
I'm going to go cry later.
99 XP.
Next up, and this is a topic I find kind of interesting. I took geology classes as my hard science classes in college. And now we have information on a new world's largest volcano. Most people, and up until recently, everyone in the geology world kind of thought Mauna Loa in Hawaii, which comes all the way up from the base of the Pacific crust on the bottom of the ocean, miles and miles through the ocean to become a mountain peak, peaking above the Pacific Ocean and the Hawaiian Islands as the world's largest volcano.
Yes.
Well, the journal Nature Geoscience now labels something called the Tamu Mastiff as the world's largest volcano.
Yes.
And here's some stats.
Okay.
It's 2.5 miles tall.
Whoa.
But it's still more than a mile below the surface of the ocean. It's 6,500 feet below the surface at its tallest point. But it's 400 miles wide.
400 miles wide and like 4 miles tall.
And 2.5 miles tall.
Okay.
That's a lot of total surface area is larger than the British Isles or the state of New Mexico.
My God.
Yeah, it's only about 25% smaller than the largest known volcano in the solar system, which is Olympus Mons on the planet Mars.
Yes, unencumbered by water, Mars.
Yes.
You can grow. You can grow really big, really, really large. Well, I suppose it was water a long time ago, maybe.
Okay, so now here's the good news.
Yes.
On this world's largest volcano.
Okay.
Unlike Yellowstone, this one is believed to be extinct.
Yeah, Yellowstone is not extinct at all. In fact,
no, we're kind of overdue for kind of big boom there.
Yeah, exactly.
As a supervolcano goes.
Yeah.
So it last erupted, scientists believe, in the Cretaceous period around 144 million years ago. Why it formed, where it did, subject of current debate and inquiry. So, if we take a Batman analogy, stay tuned to This Volcano Time and This Volcano Channel for more details in the future.
All right. So it's a scientological, geological, hacking filled news. That's fantastic.
Volcanoes produce a lot of sand-like materials and glass-like materials, which over time have become the basis for computer technology and also have become the basis as substrates for our subject, which includes storage and storage mediums.
Yes.
Today.
Let us talk about storage.
How's that for a nice awkward transition?
Well, I mean, you can break anything down into the building blocks of physical matter in the universe. And it just so happened we're lucky to be in a matter-rich part of the entire universe. So that means we can make things like floppy drives. Which brings us in again back to our topic of storage performance. Now, James, when I write a program on a computer, I use a program to write the program, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, which would be like the operating system or the kernel.
Yeah.
And underneath that, the operating system, there's another sort of operating system which runs like in the firmware of the physical hardware itself, right?
Yeah, there is what's called the BIOS, the basic input-output system, which is about to be replaced with something brand new and much bigger, but that's a topic for a different show.
Yes, that's for a different show. But basically, your BIOS is stored inside the basics components, the circuitry, the chips within the computer. It's stored. And, nothing doesn't come out of nothing. And you don't have a volcano in your computer that can actually create that from scratch. We have to store everything we write, everything we create in computers. And basically for storage performance, how fast can I start up an operating system depends on how fast I can load all of that code, from the static chips to the actual spindles to my data, my configuration, my registry setting, my startups group, all the apps that I like to start up including Skype or including your favorite load testing tool. Fire all of those things up. They all have to be read from storage and loaded into memory. And then, of course, James, what happens, let's say you're running a really large website and you're going to get hammered with hundreds and thousands of, maybe millions of transactions, and then you want to reboot the system. You have to save all of that in the database, right?
Hopefully, it's already gone to the database.
Exactly.
But what's going to happen when you reboot your web server, all of that information which was cached in RAM for very fast access, such as images or HTML files or style sheets that are constantly being re-requested, those now have to be pulled back from raw disk on the first request in order to be cached.
Right.
So you're going to take a performance hit as you go off that CPU RAM axis of resource requirements and you go out to disk or storage, and that storage could be local or it could be remote across a network connection.
Right. So storage performance is all about being able to read stuff from storage and write stuff to storage. And that could come in various different types, right? If you all remember the old days, floppy drives. Like some people have never even seen one. What was the size of a floppy drive? I don't even remember.
Well, there was an 8-inch floppy, and that was truly floppy.
Yeah,
you know,
and it flipsy around. But I've
actually got a whole set of 5 1/4-inch floppies, including some with like Windows 3 on it.
Yeah.
In my office here, and including a whole bunch of red ones that you're not supposed to put in a computer because they have viruses on them.
Yes, and then there's the smaller floppy disk, which is the 3.5. So if you think of these floppies being disks, they're really thin little things with a disk, a little very flimsy little disk that spins inside of it.
It was mylar coated with magnetic material.
Mylar magnetic material, right? Comes from a volcano. The idea being you can actually electrify ahead just like an 8-track tape. Oh, wait a minute. I'm dating myself. Just like a reel-to-reel tape. Oh, wait a minute. Gosh, man, people don't know my references. Those are really old references.
Yeah, Mark, I had a Timex Sinclair and a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64. We used to have to store stuff on cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes. Tapes. Basically some kind of magnetic substrate that you could actually electrify ahead and scroll somehow on a tape or a disc moving, a spindle, just like a record player. You'll actually write stuff. A series in binary, you would actually write that onto the disk. Now, just to cover, those old tape and floppies that were very small, and you probably hardly ever see them anymore. Some companies still back up to giant tape arrays just because that's the way they do things. But even nowadays, you've got 2 more common forms of storage, and that is your hard drive, which is usually, imagine a stack of floppies, like multiple mylar-coated spindles, a spindle that has multiple layers and multiple heads that are all sort of like if you took a record player and you stacked them all on top of one another, like 100 of them.
Hey, Mark, you're using an analogy that still a lot of people are not familiar with, that whole record player thing. Let's move forward to the CD, DVD era. Imagine if you've got a piece of media that looks like a CD or a DVD, except it's fully encased. It's coated in a material that allows you to record and playback, as opposed to just playback.
Right.
And in fact, if you were to open up a hard drive, you'd see something very, very much polished that looks just like a CD, except smaller.
But it's not optical.
It's not optical, but its reflectivity and surface preparation gives it an almost mirror-like finish because it needs that in order to be usable with the very tight tolerances they have for head-to-surface clearance, which is so tight that even smoke particles could cause what's called a head crash.
Yep.
Where it interferes with what's called the Bernoulli effect, as a rotating piece of metal generates an area of surface air, which actually causes the head to elevate just slightly.
Yep. And fluctuates. There's a little fluttering in there, yeah.
Yeah, and if you get a smoke particle or dust particle in there, say boom, it could disturb that airflow, and then head contacts with the magnetic media, and it basically removes it from the surface.
Yep.
But we've come a long way in manufacturing. We don't have those things happen that often.
Yeah.
Anymore.
But that's still the overwhelming majority of computers, particular server computing and enterprise computing that you'll see. People are running stuff on spindles. They're in the little hard drive containers. It may be in, huge. I've seen 100 terabytes, half a petabyte. People have a lot of spindles in the world. And over the next 10 years, they're probably all going to die. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsor right now, and then we'll come right back for that.
Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by NUCO, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering, PowerTest Professional Services, The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Videratech, Cloud Architect, and No Load Test. For more information, go to www.newcoe.com or call 703-856-8187.
What's the difference between a disk and an SSD, solid-state storage, James?
Solid-state storage is basically a type of RAM, except it can store the information when the power goes away. There are a couple different types. There's single-level cell. There's multi-level cell. That basically reflects the density of how much data you can put on the system. Single-level cell is considered more enterprise-ready than multi-level cell, which is more consumer. And, of course, the big problem with SSDs is that they wear out on writes.
Oh, yeah.
Versus magnetic media. So there's a limited life on the write for an SSD. So, Mark, like you, I see a lot of people going to SSDs, particularly in certain areas where there's a lot of read activity.
Sure, like a database index.
Or let's say you're archiving files on a project-by-project basis. You're going to write once and you're going to read 1,000,000 times. It's perfect for that. And then they blend that with actual on-spindle disk storage.
Yeah, so that's kind of the two things to be aware of from a performance standpoint is you've got these spindles that still have moving parts, and if you've ever seen people walk around with their laptops open and they haven't parked their drive or suspended their laptop, they're shaking that disk and the heads are moving around and they're going to shorten the life of their hard drive. Same thing happens they're very sensitive to heat, so if you don't keep hard drives cool, they will, like you say, have a head crash. But SSD is taking off like crazy. The price per computing, the price per size or megabyte or gigabyte, I guess we measure most things in gigabytes now, that your Apple hard drives, your hard drive in your Apple laptops, almost all the Ultrabooks, almost all the new ones, companies are still making a lot of money off of upgrading you from old laptop drives to an SSD or upgrading your SAN. Like migrating to SSD is a huge improvement for performance. So just keep an idea in your mind that if you're going to move an entire system to SSD, if it's intensive for writing, there may be some longevity issues where you're going to have a strategy to replace SSD. Even though you'll get great performance in the short term, the long-term life of that is actually going to degrade.
Mark, there is a technology that Microsoft and Intel partnered together to help develop back in the Windows 7 generation days, which was something called a hybrid drive, where you can take the most commonly accessed pieces primarily associated with booting and place it on this really, really, really fast SSD cache kind of at the beginning of the drive.
Like a flash card.
Yeah, kind of like a little piece of flash at the front that's just enough for the boot images and kernel and a few other things. But the majority of the hard drive was physical storage, still with a spindle, heads, and things of that nature. And they did this primarily to help address the complaint about it took so long to boot Vista compared with XP and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they moved the speed into the hardware. And one nice thing about SSD technology is it's I/O operations per second. It's IOPS or IOOPS. I'm not sure which acronym goes here.
Which either one you want.
Yeah, is so much higher.
Like an order of magnitude higher, right?
10 to 25 times higher.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, so like 10,000 IOPS per second versus 100,000 to 250,000 IOPS a second. IOPS. Simply because there are no moving parts. There's no head to move. There's no platter to move. You don't have to wait for the platter to come around to the sector that you want to read off of. So just the fact that it's memory and you just go to a raw address and pull it just is a huge increase in performance. which you can see for read-intensive operations.
Yes.
That's going to have an incredible benefit.
It's an incredible benefit. So just simply taking, if you can find out that you have a storage bottleneck of some sort in your system, then just switching to SSD might be a great solution, particularly if it's read traffic, if you're pulling a lot of data that should be cached and you're reading it. But you bring up IOPS, James, which is one of the key metrics in terms of measuring. So an IOP is an IO, like you said, IO request. IOPS would be the IO. What is the P of IOPS?
It could be a read or a write request operations per second.
It's input-output operations per second. It is OOPS. If you say, there are 2 O's in there.
Well, hey, it's an acronym. It must be more important if it has 4 instead of 3.
Yeah, so if you have a 5-letter acronym like SCUBA, it just, never catches on.
Yeah.
Radar, that never caught on.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And so that's basically a measurement of throughput on the drive. And the more contention you have on the drive for control of the heads, the fewer I/O operations per second you're going to have, because the head has to move, the platter has to move before you can generate an actual I/O op.
So there are some key things that you're going to want to measure. Probably the number one thing to look to see if your application is even doing heavy storage work is just the throughput. And usually that's measured in kilobytes per second. And that's kilobytes, as you point out before, James, reading data or writing data. And you can find this in IOStat, any of the tools, Perfmon. In fact, if the Task Manager, just in Windows, if you pop up Task Manager, you can flip over to the Performance tab and click that button to do more Perfmon data. CPU, disk, memory, network, you can see disk. It shows you logical reads, logical writes, and usually throughput. If you don't see a lot of activity, then maybe you don't really have a lot of storage dependency in the application. It could be just running in memory and it doesn't actually move a lot. That'd be similar to a mobile application that has very limited storage, so it kind of does everything in memory and across the web. It doesn't do a whole lot locally and from a storage perspective. So measuring throughput, bytes per second, is a really key part of knowing how long it's going to take to do an operation.
So Mark, I got to tell you, most of what I see from a performance improvement opportunity in the disk area has to deal a lot with people who are mismatching the type of access with the type of media. And you've kind of toyed around with this a little bit over our discussions over the last couple of minutes, matching your access type.
Right.
But that's where I see the best opportunity for performance improvements without actually rewriting the code.
Disk is very cool this way. So, and network is this way too, because you can do a lot of things with how the packets, or the I/O request for that matter, get sent back and forth. But access method-wise, again, reads versus writes in the storage layer, like the application, even the kernel doesn't even know. The operating system doesn't even know that the disks have been optimized physically one way or another. So maybe give an example of this, if you will, from a database standpoint, per se.
Sure. So I have, from a database perspective, so I've got some lookup tables which are fairly small, which I've actually pulled off of disk when the database boots, and I've pinned into RAM. So they're in RAM. I have really fast local access in this case. But then I have some tables that I look up which are extremely large, but they're indexed very well. So I have those indexes either on SSD, if they're really, really fast, and I need them very quickly, or I have them on, say, a 15,000 or 20,000 RPM drive, where I can get access to them very, very quickly, but it's still on rotational media, and it's a group of that. It's a RAID set of that. And then I have my core data. My core data may be on actually fairly slow drives. It may be on 5,400 RPM drives, but a whole lot of them. So the data is striped across them. I'm still getting good I/O operations per second, but the data itself is on drives which are very inexpensive, easy to manufacture, easy to replace, available in quantities, available in bundles. But the access method reflects how often I need to get access to the data versus how often it's used. And so I might even have one storage array, one physical device, and then I have that partitioned off. It's like, okay, here's the SSDs over here in this group, and then I have this group of 15 to 20,000 RPM drives, and I have this group of 5,400 to 7,200 RPM drives. Depending upon how much data is stored, the cost of the device, and how I need to access it. Ideally, I want to use the fastest possible access method on the read and the slowest possible access method backed by some cache on the front end on the write.
Yeah. Especially if you're looking at in the database ACID compliance that requires that request, that data get committed all the way to spindle for consistency's sake, so you can checkpoint that in the database for consistency. Interesting point you bring up. You mentioned a 20,000 RPM drive. A lot of people aren't going to see that out there, but there's a big debate about whether you can get to why don't we see more 20,000, 30,000? SSD came along, and why didn't we ever see 30,000 RPM drives? And theoretically, if the drive is small enough from a spinning circumference, the truth is you could get to go beyond the sound barrier. You could you could double a 15K drive to 30,000 RPM, but it actually takes a tremendous amount of power at a time when everyone's being green, right? We're reducing the power requirement.
Well, look and see what's happening. As we've increased rotational speed, we've actually reduced the size of the platters.
Right.
We've gone from 5 1/4 inch platters, 3.5, 2.5, 2.5 to 2.
Yep.
And I think they're 1.5 inch drives. We've increased the density. So there are certain circumstances where flash works extremely well. It has a lot of benefits, and it's matched to its premium in this case on a media perspective. And I think indexes are probably the best example.
Yeah.
Where it is evenly matched for the need versus the price. And then as you get further and further away from the index, because you have some database indexes which are for current data, then you have archival data and you have indexes there. That's probably better for rotational media.
Yep.
Give me a lot of really big, slow disks. And you go to the store and you can get a single drive that's 2 to 3 terabytes at this size.
Yeah, you can. You can. So you can get slower disks that are larger volumes just because of the capacity of each spindle or each platter is that size. James, it's the bottom of the hour. And so you know what time it is.
I'm always scared of this introduction.
Hello, PerfBytes listeners. It's your old friend Satan here. It is with great esteem that I'm proud to introduce this week's edition of The News of the Damned.
Can you dig it?
There's the guy screaming again in the background, James.
Yeah, that always disturbs me.
I know it does. And apparently other people were concerned, a little concerned about Satan. And us.
They are, but they heard it was your soul being sold, Mark, but so it was okay.
But, I am worried about the people, as we pointed out at the beginning of the show, that are possessed. Perfectly good, decent IT people that are being possessed and causing mayhem in the world and crashing sites because they don't know what they're doing.
Let me tell you about a few.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be News of the Damned without a sporting event.
Oh, yes.
And we'll begin with the Chilean World Cup.
Okay.
So Chilean World Cup tickets went on sale recently. What do you think happened?
I don't know. Website crashed.
All I have to do is say that, and you know how to predict it.
Oh, yeah.
How could these folks at the FIFA, which is the world sanctioning body for World Cup soccer, not see this coming?
Yeah, soccer, football, as they would say around the world, except for the United States. Yeah, football. One of the most people have died getting trampled in the mayhems of craziness at stadiums, and in hundreds of. Come on, it's more popular than fashion potentially.
Potentially, I can't imagine what would happen if a bunch of soccer hooligans, ransacked a data center. But actually, I can't imagine what would happen.
Isn't that? Wasn't that what it was like working on campus in Redmond? Actually,
yeah. Good point. So anyway, the FIFA's websites crashed due to high traffic volume. Entirely predictable.
Yes.
You knew when the tickets were going to go on sale. You have a finite number of tickets. You have 15 gazillion raging soccer fans in the universe, including my buddy Jim Dozier in Chicago, who I stayed with while I was on my road trip.
Oh yes, yes.
I definitely consider him a soccer hooligan. They're all waiting for these tickets to go on sale. How could you not know this? This is a point load event. And as we all know, point load usually leads to, the server died.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Mark, we agreed we were going to make some recommendations to people here.
Yes.
So the governing body is, put up a Twitter page that more than 1 million ticket applications were submitted within 7 hours. The headquarters is in Zurich, Switzerland. We need someone in Germany, Italy, or Switzerland. Who's your thought?
We'll call the guys in Israel.
Okay.
I mean, maybe not if you're from Germany, although I think relations are much better nowadays between the two countries.
Okay, so also, you can't have a News of the Damned without concerts in the United Kingdom going bad.
That's true. Welcome to the UK.
So dance music pioneers, The Prodigy, their website crashed as they announced tour dates for Manchester's famous Warehouse Project this December. Once again, you have limited number of tickets, you have a larger fan base, tickets go on sale, boom, website crashes, and I'm going to call out a good friend of ours on this one, Mark.
Yes.
Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Bishop.
Calling Mr. Richard Bishop.
Richard Bishop to the front, please.
This is in your backyard, sir. It's Manchester.
It's in Manchester. Yeah. In fact, he should look up to get a permanent gig with these guys. Let's get it right.
Next up, and I'm kind of segmenting these items. So we started with sporting events. We've gone to concerts. Now we have academia and government.
We've seen this a bit before. We've seen in New Jersey, the Department of Vehicles, right? Remember Princeton? A lot of New Jersey.
We've seen it around the world. We've seen it in China, India, the UK, the U.S., and this one is in the U.S.
In the heartland.
In the heartland. It's in Ohio.
Ohio.
The state that determines the president.
That's right.
The Ohio Department of Education website goes down.
Boom.
Boom. Ohio evidently has a grading scale for schools. So the schools get a report card, and it's released on a given date. So, of course, school administrators and interested parents want to look at the report card. So you have defined point at which information becomes available. You have very interested parties. And what do you think happens, Mark?
It crashed.
It crashed. It's a point load situation again.
Specific date. They knew it was coming. Second of all, this is probably read-only information.
Yes.
Right? And there's no one...
They pre-staged this in Amazon.
Static content in a CDN, Akamai. Yeah, totally.
So yeah, we have this artificial point load situation created where there were lots of opportunities to pre-stage the data, to remove load from the core website. And there was a deliberate decision made not to do that.
Not to do it. Again, they were possessed. These were perfectly normal people who, we just put it on the website. And, something made them not think about this.
I think we need a top 10 rules if you have a point load situation.
Yeah.
Outside of, ticket sales and stuff like that. We need a top 10 rules that, we put out, maybe on our website or something.
We could put it on our website as static content, but we'd be smart enough to maybe put it in Akamai.
Or hey, maybe put it on Amazon as a brochure that people, pay
Exactly. All right, what else we got?
So next up, we got sporting events, concerts, academia and government, talking heads. This is, people on radio and TV who bring information to the public. This could be Dr. Oz. This could be Oprah.
Yes.
In this case, it's Rush Limbaugh.
Talking head. And Rush is not new to the News of the Damned.
Rush is not new. Now Rush has a bad reputation with us because he crashed his own website.
Right, exactly.
And in doing so, he made himself ineligible to be Person of the Year.
That's true.
But what he did is he invited Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, who appeared on the Rush Limbaugh show. They were talking about political controversy in the United States involving national health care, in this case, where certain factions in the United States, Congress and Senate, are trying to defund this effort to actually implement it. And they have a website called don'tfundit.com.
Yeah.
And so this was brought forward on the Rush Limbaugh show. And what do you think happened to the website?
Kaboom. As Wilson Mara pointed out to me, this is the Slashdot effect. If we want to be hip, flash crowd crashing.
But you know what? I'm wondering, it'd be kind of cool, if we could get PerfBytes on there as the source of the crash for Don't Fund It.
Well, we would have to put a load generator on the PerfBytes host and then send traffic
No.
from our domain.
I want all of our fans to just go there, just go to the front page and just exit.
Now you're organizing a denial of service hacking attack. That's a very black hat of you, my friend. Again, this is, the Slashdot effect where somebody really, really popular, and Rush is not new to this. Steve Harvey show we've had. These guys, if you Prancer Size, you remember, really, really popular.
And there's another top 10 tips we need.
Yeah.
If you're going to appear on a public website, a public show, something like that, here are 10 things you need to do to prepare.
All right.
Okay, so next up is our wild card entry for this. Wild card entry.
That's way too loud.
I put this one under the title of Geographers Unite. So on the news we had about the world's largest volcano.
Yes.
Now we're going to talk about map maker and atlas publisher Rand McNally.
Rand McNally, yes.
Rand McNally's been running this contest for actually fairly small cities inside the United States as to which is the most patriotic city. And it came down to a competition between Gallup, New Mexico, and Mandan, New Mexico.
Yes.
So they in the words of one of their mayors, they've had a very spirited competition going on for the past 6 weeks.
Yes.
But a last-minute surge of votes actually took out the Rand McNally voting site. So I want to give you a sense of scale here.
This was running underneath someone's desk somewhere, I'm guessing?
I don't know, but I want to give you a sense of scale.
Yes.
So Mandan won with 3,554 votes.
Yes.
To Gallup, New Mexico's 108 votes.
And, of course, all the other cities that had less than 108.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at this, and I have a hypothesis, Mark.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
Okay, is it just me, or does someone else think some automation was involved?
Yeah, JMeter is a free tool.
And all I can say is, think time, people. Think time.
Yeah, be realistic. You know? Yeah. Which brings us to the point of saying,
ethically, you shouldn't take out other people's websites, but
yes.
think time.
There is ethics involved, actually. Like, especially if you sell ads on your site and then you take an automated tool and hammer your site to increase your numbers. They'll catch on to you.
I don't know what you're talking about, Mark.
I don't know what you're talking about either. Great. So there's the News of the Damned. Lots of geography and geology this week on News of the Damned.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is I'm going to say it's the igneous version of PerfBytes, this episode.
Ooh, and I actually drove through a lava field, but that's a different story. I think that was in Arizona, a dormant volcano. And
yes.
Well, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Back to our topic, storage. Storage! It's where you put your stuff, not just in the garage. Your application actually has to store the data somewhere. And one of the things, we talked a bit about SSD and this maximum number of IOs. And we're talking about simultaneous I/O requests that SSD, a single SSD controller can, because it doesn't have to wait on a spindle and it just goes through the roof, this max amount of I/O. But next, James, I just kind of want to talk a bit about, there is an architecture, if you're not talking about local storage, and we talk a bit about SANs and going across the network and doing this kind of stuff, I like to think of this as a multi-lane freeway, right? And if you ever lived in Seattle and you've got to make it from the east side to the west side or the west side to the east side during rush hour, there's two bridges. One of them is like a 6-lane freeway. One of them is like a little 2-lane freeway at 520. And everyone kind of has to throttle down into this little itty-bitty single 2-lane, sometimes it's 1 lane just because of construction, to get across the lake, right? Lake Washington.
Is that the floating bridge?
They're one's floating, they're both partially floating, actually.
Ah, okay.
But anyway, the idea being, if your storage is on one side of the lake and your app is on the other side of the lake, you got to think about how many simultaneous requests can I handle, or do I have to everyone get in a line and start queuing? And so we're measuring things like we would in an app server with request queues, web servers, request queues. If you start queuing up those requests, whenever it's a physical resource, if it starts to back up, traffic gets really bad in the morning. So we're just backed up all the way onto I-5 because you can't get onto the bridge because everything has to go down to 1 lane.
And Mark, here is why I'm not a big fan of network-attached storage, or by extension, even cloud storage.
Okay.
It kind of combines the most expensive attributes of the 2 most expensive resource requests.
From a performance standpoint.
Yes. So if we think of one axis as having CPU and RAM, that's very, very fast.
Very fast, yes.
And if we cross that with a different axis of disk and network, well, if we have network-attached storage, as opposed to storage-attached network, which is kind of host adapter-based, network-attached storage, we've now combined the worst of both possible attributes.
Yeah.
So we might have network-attached storage, NFS storage, or a filer, or someplace across the network, but that's not going to be really good for performance. And if we think of even more distant attached storage, think of something like an S3 on Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
And you have
not even in our organization. It's going to take forever to get there.
Yeah, and so because you have network that's slower than disk, you might find out that it looks like a disk problem, and actually the disk on the other side is plenty fast. You just have a network in between. So that's why I want to say the path between the host, between your app running on a server, or even the client having to do some storage, uploading a file, downloading a file, a PDF. We just talked about it on News of the Damned. Just getting that information. You have to move that stuff across the wire. So one rule of thumb that you can use is which data needs to live at which part of the architecture. So does everything need to be in the database? Well, then you're going to be doing a lot of data movement across the wire, and you better make sure you have a lot of paths. Another thing you might find is that, let's say somebody is doing an interim application, and they interact on the front end with multiple steps in the process, but you don't really need to commit the whole thing to the database until the order or the form or the activity is complete. It might be adequate to store something in the client or the app tier sort of on a temporary basis. You may say, well, it's expensive to go all the way to the central database on the back end, and I'm really not going to commit everything until it's all the way done. So sometimes you give people an opportunity to save it locally, and then they finish it and they submit it. You can actually save it in storage. You can have a smaller database running. This could be done in JMS. It could be done in a message queue system, some sort of interim piece of the architecture that sort of hangs on to that message. And it doesn't have to wait to, asynchronous. It doesn't have to wait synchronously. It'll actually throw that into a message. And asynchronously, it can get written to the database at a later point. The database can actually go down and crash, and you'll still store those messages in the bus. So there's something as we move into enterprise message bus kind of system, right? Where you're actually moving data around the system all the time, and it's getting cached at certain points. It's being stored in memory. It may be only secondarily sitting on a disk in the app server. And then eventually it makes it all the way back to the database. So James, this sort of opened the door over the last 5 or maybe I'll say 10 years for doing NoSQL, which is there really is no one central ACID compliant database. There's just sort of data moving around all the time. So that's a major part of storage, yeah.
And I can remember a couple of years ago we were doing a series of benchmarks for a customer, and we were benchmarking a lot of different solutions true ACID compliant databases, such as Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, and they were up against this highly parallel solution of NCR Teradata with storage nodes and query nodes and stuff like that. Lots of processors, lots of data front ends, common storage, and Teradata just blew through the benchmark versus these other companies, simply because they were not quite a SQL compliant solution, so they would fall into the NoSQL category.
Right. So parallelism is a huge part of optimizing storage, because if I'm inserting 30 requests per second, for say, and those 30 requests per second could go into a partitioning scheme, you put the most recent partition of the data on the fastest volumes and optimize those for insert and writing, while you take your historic data that you're mostly going to read and query and do reporting on, you put those on maybe even slower spindles, but you're going to sort of stretch them out and have them do read-only. So this is where you have to keep these concepts in mind. Reading and writing, James, you mentioned the access methods and making sure you understand which app functions do reading, which ones do writing, and then optimizing logically the channels to be able to have multiple parallel paths of I/O happening. And this could happen across the network, also happen within a local machine on a database server or on a message server. And I'll give you an example. I've done a lot of partitioning as a form of optimization, where instead of, like I mentioned, time series data, now Teradata and Netezza, where a lot of time series data, you're sort of super optimizing the constant flow of information on an elapsed time.
And we do a lot of that with Splunk as well.
Oh, yeah.
Say the first 30 days worth of data in local, very fast storage, and then as we get more than 30 days out, we might actually desample in addition to moving to slower storage. So we might, instead of having 100% of data, we might go to 80% of data or 60% of data, depending upon the age, because we're really looking at trend information over time versus more current data where we're making decisions.
Yep. And if you ever work with statisticians, quantitative people, in insurance or trades or other sensor-based information, either manufacturing or we mentioned geology, so you could look at oil wellheads. Are a big thing, a wellhead information if you're doing sort of...
Or frequency of seismic data.
Frequency of seismic data, right? This is all time series, elapsed, ongoing time is moving ahead. If you only have to insert that information and store it, you optimize the inserts in one way. But a lot of the value in that information, like you say, James, is rolling different aggregations, different calculations for the trend. And so optimizing for read, partitioning that data down to a daily or even hourly basis, depending, like in trades, you want to say, well, what are the hourly trades over the last N number of minutes even? You're going to optimize those reads. If you have all those reads for all those partitions on one volume coming down one fiber channel card, or even a SAS, so single array, wow, again, parallel, make that parallel. If I have 64 processors, I want 64 logical partitions. I want, if I could get it, 64 fiber channel cards, 64 paths in the fiber network, 64 controllers on the back end, and 64 individual RAID groups on my storage. I mean, a 64-lane highway would give me absolutely no weighting at all layers of that query. And this is something that, depending on the data, you can pre-optimize for. And make sure that it's actually good. So Splunk is a good example of a very specific application, and they know how to build that in such a way that they'll get you You can come up with crazy queries in Splunk, and they actually perform pretty well if your configuration, your storage configuration is there. Let's talk about tools you might need to use when it comes to performance, storage performance. So, James, what are some of the things that you've used to actually test direct, like we generate load on websites or database servers or Citrix or something. Have you ever done like an FTP test or an actual storage throughput test?
Actually, I have. It was for, we'll call it the largest private company in the United States. People can go and look that up if they want. But it was a test of a network attached storage. It was a filer test, we came up with a benchmark, and they were moving their filers around their network to see where they would have the best performance.
Okay.
So it was a combination of reads, writes, copies, deletes. This was all built in LoadRunner, by the way.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a cool test. Not LoadRunner, not really designed for that per se, but we used it as a benchmarking tool. We were able to take a look at that. But what we did is it took very explicit monitoring. In addition to the response times for the time it took to read or write a file, we were looking at I/O operations per second. We were looking at bytes per second coming into and out of the filer in this case.
Yeah.
We were looking at network tools in the case of this. We had, I think it was Ethereal at the time that we were using.
Ethereal, yeah.
To actually look at the raw I/O bytes coming into and out of the filer in that case. But there are other tools, certainly. You can look at your filer manufacturer-specific tools if you're looking at EMC, or you're looking at other network-attached storage.
Sure. Hitachi has a whole set of tools internally that manage the different performance. You can manage, get the trends, get the reporting, and automatically tune.
There's even OS-specific items. Mark, you mentioned IOStat, which is built into most versions of Unix or Linux, and there are complements inside of Windows as well. And there's some third-party tools like IO meter.
Now, Iometer is a pretty interesting because it can generate load as well. You can give it kind of a dummy file, and it'll take that dummy file, whatever piece that is. You don't have to have an application at all, just the operating systems and your network or your local storage, wherever that disk goes through. And it'll create whatever mix of read and write you want to do. So if you think a spindle or a volume is optimized for writing, and you run Iometer, it can actually generate that kind of load. So you can actually test the infrastructure of the storage and the operating system before you even install the application, and then you make sure that core storage architecture is completely optimized before you move ahead. You don't just find out, way later.
And if you have a storage area network, usually these are intelligent devices that are plugged in. For example, your fiber channel switch, there's usually an Ethernet port on that for management, SNMP data, and things of that nature.
Sure.
Collect that data.
Yeah, you can import the SNMP MIB directly into LoadRunner if you want to monitor a switch.
Yes.
I've done that. The other thing I'll mention is an IOStat. You mentioned that's one of my favorite Linux tools for this. Corey Goldberg posted a bunch of stuff. Corey works for Canonical, and he has a whole bunch of great tools that he uses in the Unix world to monitor performance, similar to top. There's a command that he uses. IOStat, if you're going to just use good old IOStat, IOStat -X gives you the extended view device by device, and you can see, again, we talked about I/O latencies, number of I/O requests, reads, kilobytes read, kilobytes written, any busies or waits, any I/O wait status. That IOStat gives you the raw thing. But again, it's a fairly raw tool. It doesn't give you anything as nice as graphically like Splunk or any of these other tools that you would import the data into to monitor over time. Which brings me back to perfmon in Windows, which starting in Windows 7, actually starting in Vista, but really in Windows 7, I love the perfmon tool. I had a lot of time spent working with those guys and giving them, James, the good old CPU disk memory network, like everything should be split in those 4 buckets. If you go look at perfmon, they did it.
That's exactly how it's split out these days.
Yeah, and I can wonder why that is.
It'd be nice if they could give us a nice radial graph in the next edition of Windows that actually showed it as along those 3 axes as it's spreading out and being used on the different areas.
Yeah, split a pie chart into 4 different parts and see where I'm spending the majority of my time. Which one should I focus on? That could be very interesting. So perfmon, even the task manager can show you some stuff. CPU and memory it'll show you, but it won't really show you disk, and you'll get some network out of you'll see some of the throughput graphs on task manager, but click the button in the performance tab and go down into actual perfmon in the latest versions of Windows, and you'll see that it's far greater detail, that you can see specific processes, how many bytes they're moving to disk, how many bytes they're reading from disk, and you can see it by default, you don't have to do you don't have to be a perfmon guru or anything like that. It's fairly simply laid out.
And Mark, before we go, I want to make sure to recommend one of our favorite books for this show, which is Modern Operating Systems by Andrew Tannenbaum.
Oh yes, Mr. Tannenbaum.
Mr. Tannenbaum. No, he's not. He's not about Christmas. He's Mr. Tannenbaum.
Oh Tannenbaum, oh Tannenbaum.
So, if you don't own a copy of this book, this is a perfect excuse to go and pick one up. It doesn't have to be a new edition. I think it's like in its 5 millionth edition or something. Pick up an earlier edition. That talks about storage management in the Modern Operating Systems book, how the operating system interfaces with storage and things of that nature. And it's good to have that primary background when looking at a subject which is evolving very rapidly, like storage, because it provides a nice solid foundation when you approach something that's new and odd or unique or different, that you have a good set of foundation skills that you can draw from. And to say, oh, okay, that is like X, and then you can move forward with it. Mark, I think we should probably find a way to put a link to Modern Operating Systems on PerfBytes.com. So
I think we should do that.
Those people don't have it, they can go and buy a copy.
Yeah, so that's storage performance. Yet again, we thank you for spending another hour of your precious time listening to PerfBytes, which is always wonderful. And I will say thank you to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes, who is always supportive and always sexy and always Irish.
I'd like to thank my mother, because I know at least we have one person listening to the show, and that makes me feel good. Thanks, Mom. This episode of PerfBytes is brought to you by bunnies. They're not just fun at Easter, they're fun all the time.
Just a reminder that all the content on PerfBytes is owned by PerfBytes LLC and is shared under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives version 3.0 unported license. Of course, if you'd like to use any of the content of the PerfBytes show, feel free to contact us at info@perfbytes.com. You should also know that PerfBytes supports the ongoing work of the Performance Engineering Book of Knowledge, an industry-wide initiative to standardize knowledge and practices for performance testing and engineering. And of course, thanks to our friends at the Computer Measurement Group, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, and to the nearest web performance meetup group in your town. We're supporters of the Software Test Professionals community of testers, and we hope to see you at the next STPCon.
If you love PerfBytes and you just cannot get enough of Mark and I and all of our hysterical ramblings, you can follow us at a number of locations. On Twitter, you can hit us at @PerfBytes. We have a Facebook fan page. For Tumblr, you can get us at perfbytes.tumblr.com. For quick videos, quick.com/perfbytes. Of course, there's the PerfBytes LinkedIn forum. On iTunes, you can search the store for PerfBytes and subscribe. And last but not least is the perfbytes.com webpage. Follow us everywhere.
So, James, people should join us in 2 weeks for the next episode of PerfBytes, what's the topic for 2 weeks? What are we doing?
Oh, Mark, it's one of my favorites.
Really?
It's performance test planning.
Performance test planning, yeah. Because everyone should know the subtleties of how to do this, because it's not just you get 2 weeks and you're done. The default answer is 2 weeks, but we'll tell you that there's more to the puzzle than that.
Thank you for tuning into PerfBytes. We really appreciate your support. Have a great couple of weeks till we see you again.
Have a great couple of weeks. We'll see you next time.